time to talk about time. Time matters. Right? We talked about summertime last week and how summertime creates unique opportunities for us to do different things, change the schedule, longer days, warmer days, things like that. Every season has its opportunities, times. Time matters. We were made for life. Not just to be alive, but to actually, Jesus called it abundant life, or to be full of life, to have a life that engages our hearts and souls and minds and spirits and other people and relationships and love. We were made for life. And life is lived in time and in space. Our lives are lived in time and in space. Like we live in this generation, these days, and we were made for this time and for this space. And because we were made for life, and life is lived in time and space, time matters a lot. Time is also really elusive. It's hard to get your hands around exactly what we're talking about when we're talking about time. Because once you bring it up, once you say this time, that time is already gone, and we're in the next time, and right? Because we're always trying to kind of figure out exactly where it is and what it is that we're talking about when we talk about time. And I discovered that in an agonizing way this week. Because when I dove into this series about time, I didn't take the time to completely map out the series. I usually do kind of up front, know where I'm going throughout the series, but I didn't do that when I decided to preach on time. I just started with summertime and then said, hey, this is a great idea. We're going to build on this. And I spent too much time this week trying to figure out how to talk about time with you. We use it in so many different ways, right? For example, if someone, their wardrobe is out of date, or they have ideals that our generation might consider old-fashioned, we say they are, anyone? Behind the times, right? If something's important, we're really, really busy, but it's so important that we have to figure out how to do it. We say that we need to make time for it. If you have friends and you're together and you're just having a really great time, and suddenly you look at the clock and you realize it's an hour past curfew, you will say that you're out of time, or that you lost track of time, or sometimes we say things like time flies, especially when you're having fun. You don't know how something's going to turn out, and you're kind of anxious about it, but you know that in a week or in 2 weeks that you'll know the answer. We say things like, time will tell. You finish a project at the very last minute, and you will say it was done just in the nick of time. We use time to talk about measurement. How we measure things, right? We talk about time, how fast you walked or ran a mile, or how long it takes to boil an egg, or how long it takes for you to commute to work. If I said, what did you do yesterday? Or what did you do this week? You'll say, on Monday, I did this and went to work, and then I came home and I cut the grass and had dinner, and on Tuesday, I had a doctor's appointment, and you can kind of map out the calendar, the things that you did during the course of the week. Time is a resource that we use. And as long as we're alive, we have the exact same quantity of time. Every one of it. As long as we're alive in a day or in a week or in a month or a year, if you're alive, you live through the rest of this day, you're going to have 24 hours in this day. Every one of us. We're going to have 7 days in this week. We're going to have 365 days in this year. We're going to have 10 years in a decade. Time as a measurement is equal, is the same. Not how many years we have or how many days we have, but the days that we have are all measured exactly the same. And what we do in a given time period is a measure of how we divvy up that time. How much time we spend sleeping, how much time we spend in the shower and brushing our teeth, how much time we spend cooking and cleaning, how much time we spend at work, how much entertainment time we have. One of the great markers of our day is how much screen time do we have in a given day. And if you get that little notice at the end of the week that said your screen time this week was up 23% from last week, it's like, are you kidding me? I really spent that much time in front of a screen. Time is a measurement. We talk about how do we maximize it? How can we become more efficient or more effective with the quantity of time that we have? We also talk about time to assess the value of the time that we've spent, of the time that we've used. So I said, what did you do today is one question, but how was your day is a different question. But it's talking about the same period of time, right? We're talking about the same 24 hours, but in one sense we're talking about how you used the time, how you measured it out, how you divvied it up. And the second question is, what was the quality of that time? What was the effect of the things that you did with it? I ask you, how was your day? I'm not asking you for a rundown of your calendar. I'm asking for your experience of the passage. And how we answer that question will likely be connected to how what we did lines up with what gives us life, or what our sense of purpose is, or the things that matter to us, or the things that make us feel alive. It's not just what we did, but it's how it went. If you had a really productive week at work, and you love your job, and you love the projects that you're working on, and I say, how was your week? You say, my week was awesome. I had a great week. I got all this work done. You can have a really productive week, but you hate your job, and your boss is driving you nuts, and he's down. You got it done, but it's more of like yeah, it's finished, but, right? It's not a good feeling. If you had a date, and the date was great, it's like, I had a great week. But if you ended up in a fight on the date, it was lousy. If you studied all week for a test, and you aced the test, it was incredible. I spent 24 hours studying for the test, and I passed it. I got flying colors. It was awesome. You bombed the test. Completely different experience of that time. The quality of our lives is the product of the use of our time. The quality of our lives is the product of the use of our time, what we do with it, and how that lines up with how we want to live our lives. Deb and I mentioned last week, recently celebrated our anniversary. And no, we're not doing it again. Thank you. Ready? No, I'm sorry. But we do this occasionally as a family. We did a remember when kind of thing. It's like we just start, remember when, and we start talking through our lives and the different experiences that we had throughout the course of our lives. And it's really a great exercise. I encourage it. Go home today and sit around the table and say, hey, remember when, and just pick things out of your history, out of your story, and it will, once you start doing it, it will trigger other ideas and other ideas. And we spent, I don't know, probably 3 or 4 hours just remembering different parts of our story. And doing that, brought back, a lot of laughter, some tears, but just kind of the substance of our lives. And what kind of, in observing that, the quality wasn't all on the schedule of our lives. The things that we remember and treasure and the things that make us laugh and that make us cry. You can't go back in our calendar, we put this 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 in, and that's why all these happened. Sometimes we try and start parsing out quality time and quantity time because we're so busy and we have so many things that we have to do, but they're not necessarily the things that are most important to us. But we have things that really are important to us that we don't have time for. So we say we're going to give these things quantity. We're going to give these things our quantity time, but we're going to give these our really focus and make this our quality time. But it doesn't happen on schedule. And quality is born out of quantity. Paul exhorts us. We looked at this passage last week in Ephesians chapter 5. Be careful how you live. Not like fools, but like those who are wise. Well, how do wise people live? Paul says they make the most of every opportunity. Remember, most of is not meaning you maximized every minute in the sense, in the way that Paul is using the word. Making the most of is that you used it in the very, very best way possible. Redeemed it. You reclaimed it from all of the things that you could have done. He says the days are evil. You reclaimed it from the things that are evil, from the things that don't fulfill us and our purpose and our glory and our meaning and our stuff, that we're taking it back and using it in the ways that bring us fullness of life, in the way that God created us, in the way that Jesus came to redeem us. Redeeming the time. But to redeem the time, we ask questions like, what is life? What is its meaning? What is my purpose in it? And how do I allocate my time? How do I divvy it up to experience life? And what things am I responsible for? What things do I have to do? What can I control? What can't I control? And how do I navigate that? What do I do about the things that I have to do and I can't control them, but they're still a part of my life, of my life? To redeem our time, we have to pay careful attention to some really hard questions. What is the meaning of life? What is my purpose? Those are not easy questions to answer. Sometimes it's hard to know what we should be doing, and sometimes we know exactly what we should be doing. It's just really hard to do. And there is a relentless pull on our time to go with the flow. If we don't ask the hard questions and make the decisions then that go along with those questions and commit to doing it that way, there is a relentless pull to go with the flow. To go with the flow of what other people want us to do with our time. To go with the flow of the things that just have to be done in any given day and forget about the things that really matter and that bring us life. To just go with the flow. And here's the thing, when you go with the flow, if you've ever watched water flow, it creates a rut. It turns into a ditch. And the deeper that rut gets, the more the water runs through that path. And the more water that runs through that path, we know that over time can actually become a Grand Canyon. And it's really, really hard to get out of that rut. There are a lot of helpful guides to navigate time. There are time management systems that help us schedule out what we're doing in a given day and in a given week and in a given month and in a given year. I have a calendar that I put all those things into and kind of plot them out and make sure that I have time to do all the things that are important and the things that we want to do, and kind of just to measure out and to divvy up the time that we have and to do it in a purposeful way. It helps me make sure I get to the right places on the right days at the right time. And if you ever set up a time with me to get together and we're going to meet, make sure I put it in my calendar before we stop talking, because unless it's in my calendar, the farther I get along in my life, the more likely I am to not get to where I'm supposed to be at the time that I'm supposed to be there. Some of you might have that experience too, and some of you might think, well, geez, you're just getting old. So there are time management systems, and they're really useful. I commend them to you, especially if you have a hard time getting places on time, if you have a hard time doing the things that you really want to do. There are also life planner systems that help us connect what we want to do with our lives, that takes the questions about what is the meaning of life, what is the purpose of my life, and then takes what we do and connects it to what we want, to take the quantity of our time and connect it to the quality of our time. I did one recently. It's called Hero on a Mission. It was created by author Donald Miller. And he starts out his life planner with this question. Well, actually, with this assignment. He says, write your obituary. Look at the end of your life. And what do you want your story to be when your story is over? What do you want people to say about you at your funeral? And then take that and reverse engineer your life. Say, well, if this is where I want my life to end, if this is what I want my story to be, what do I have to do this week towards that end? What do I have to do this month? What do I have to do this year? What do I have to do in the next 5 years, the next 10 years? To actually work back through time to say, okay, this is the end of my story. This is how I'm going to live my life to make that a reality, to look at the end of our lives. Which is actually applies the wisdom of Solomon, who says in Ecclesiastes chapter 7, Solomon had a whole lot to say of time. As we look at those over the next few weeks, we're going to come back to Solomon a good number of times. Solomon says, it is better to go to a house of mourning than go to a house of feasting. It's better to go to a funeral than to a feast. Because, he says, for death is the destiny of everyone, and the living should take this to heart. If this is where the story ends, then how will we live our lives? Look at the end. For our purposes today, though, I want to go back to the other end of the equation. To not start with the end, but to start with the beginning. And not just of my time or your time, but to start with the beginning of the time. Genesis chapter 1 begins this way. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. John takes up that same idea in John chapter 1. In the beginning, starts with the same words, but he says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And John is effectively saying, in the beginning, before the beginning. Like in the beginning, God created the heavens and earth, but before he did that, there was already the Word who was with God and was God, and all of this divine presence existed outside of time, before time, and then created time. Which is to say this: there is one who transcends time, who is without the beginning of days, Scripture says, or the end of life. If we see the importance of time to our lives, and we're trying to figure it out, we're trying to figure out how to use our time, how to redeem it for fullness of life. Doesn't it make sense to look to the one who stands outside of time, who made time as an ally, as a counselor, as a guide in how we use our time. David said, I trust in you, Lord. You are my God. My times are in your hands. I would give that to you today as an assignment out of this message. Write those words down. Say that prayer at the beginning of every day this week. You want to redeem your time. You want to make the most of every opportunity. You want to live your life, and you believe that God transcends times, that God is outside of time, that then if that's true, then your life is in his hands. Just declare it from the beginning of the day. I trust in you, Lord. You are my God. My times, this day is in your hands. If you believe that, the wisdom writers advised us to factor that into our life plan then. Solomon again, many are the plans in a person's heart, but it is the Lord's purpose that prevails. We have all kinds of plans, all kinds of ideas, all kinds of things that we want to do, think we should do with our lives. God's purposes, times are in his hands, will prevail. Solomon says, well, if that's the case, for all the plans that you have, what is the Lord's purpose? Because that is what's going to prevail at the end of the day. James, the brother of Jesus, says, look here, you who say today or tomorrow, we are going to a certain town and we'll stay there in a year. We will do the business there and make a profit. How do you know what your life will be like tomorrow? Your life is like the morning fog. It's here a little while, then it's gone. What you ought to say, James says, is if the Lord wants us to, we will live and do this or do that. It is the Lord's purposes that prevail. Dallas Willard was not one of the wisdom writers that you find in the scriptures, but some people consider him maybe one of the most brilliant Christian thinkers of the late 20th, 21st century. He died in the last few years. Professor of philosophy at USC. The people who knew Dallas Willard talk about a man who, more than anybody else that they've encountered, and the things that I've read speak to this, was a man who learned to live his life in the Lord's hands. And he says this, you must arrange your days, your time, your hours, your schedule. When you're divvying up your time, you must arrange your days so that you are experiencing abundance, quality, deep contentment, joy, and confidence in your everyday life with God. You want to redeem the time, Dallas says. And you see this played out. You see the effect of this in his life. Then we have to arrange our calendars, our schedules, our days to create the space for God to be a part of our lives so that we're experiencing not a perfect life, deep contentment in who we are in God's hands. Not always happiness, but joy. Not always certainty about where we are or what we're doing or what we should do or why we're doing, but confident that we're in God's hands in our everyday life with God. So this is how we're going to unpack this over the next few weeks. How do we do that? How do we arrange our days? We have to, first of all, accept that there are some time limits to our lives. Every one of them. There are time limits. And some of us live in denial about that. We think that if we just try hard enough, we can somehow eke out 26 hours of a day. And it is a recipe for trial and struggle and anxiety and frustration and disappointment. We have to accept that there are time limits. And because there are time limits, we have to make some time commitments. It requires some discipline. We actually have to stop and say, okay, I don't have an infinite amount of time. How am I going to use the time that I have and actually commit to how we use that time? And then we're going to have to contend with some interruptions. Because regardless of our commitments, things don't always go on schedule. Things happen outside of our control. In other people's lives, in the world, that infringe upon our time, and how we respond to that, how we navigate that, what we do with that, again, will affect the quality, the fullness, the abundance of our life. And we need to account for what happens when time's up. Because what we believe, not just in our head, not just what we say we believe, but what we believe about what happens when time's up, has a great effect on how we use the time that we have. Time limits, time commitments, interruptions, and the end of time. I trust in you, Lord. I say, you are my God. My times are in your hands. Lord, it is true, whether we remember it or not, whether we acknowledge it or not, whether we know it or not, our times are in your hands. But remembering it, knowing it, believing in it, growing in it, frees us up to contentment and joy and peace and help and hope. So I pray, Lord, as we begin our days, reminding ourselves and declaring again to you that you are our God, our times are in your hands, that you would show us the path each day that leads to life. I pray in Jesus' name, amen.